Hello everyone and welcome to a new video. Today's video is going to be a little bit different than anything I've done before. It's just a video of me painting and drawing and designing, or the designs are kind of done. I'm mostly just filling in the designs. Basically, this month I had a problem with prints, so I need to come up with rewards for my top tier patrons quite quickly, and I decided that I could draw the rewards. So I came up with a big list of things that I could potentially sketch and ideas that I was enthusiastic about, but I didn't really want to plan those ideas out when I didn't have time to make them. But I realized that a lot of the ideas seem to have a decade in common, and that was the 1830s. So I decided instead of sketching things that I'm planning on making and have materials to make, I would primarily sketch designs that I just think would be fun to make. I did all of this in a single evening, and I decided to film the process and narrate over it and talk a little bit about each design and why I think it would be fun to make and what fabrics I think I would use for it. And also just have this be a catchy, and also just have this be a chatty catch-up. So I really hope you enjoy, and if this isn't your sort of thing, then I totally understand. I will be back in another week or so with something else that you will hopefully like better. So let's just go ahead and get started. So this first sketch was inspired by dresses from the 1830s, as is the case with most of them, but some of them definitely veer more towards styles that were popular in the 1820s or the 1840s, whereas this is a really quite true 1830s design. There was this type of sleeve in the 1830s, which wasn't particularly common, but can be seen on a few extant garments and a few fashion plates. And the bottom edge of the sleeve was pleated in a different direction than the top edge, which creates these very precise looking cartridge-like pleats that meet in the center point of the sleeve in a zigzag shape. And it's quite difficult to explain, it's quite difficult to draw too, so I will link some examples in the description box. But it's always been something that I find quite fascinating and I think would be incredibly fun to try and accomplish. I don't know if I've seen anyone recreate sleeves like this, so it'd be a cool challenge, and even if someone has done it before, it'd still be a challenge for me. But sleeves are usually my least favorite part of making a costume. So to make a costume where the sleeves are the primary focus and the kind of fun part of it, I think would be really an interesting twist for me. And I didn't have any fabrics that would work for a dress like this. I still don't. I think it would actually lend itself really well to being made out of a silk satin, so a Duchess satin or something that's quite heavy but also quite fluid. So it'd be able to hold the shape without being starched or reinforced too much, but it also wouldn't be so thick that it would take up a lot of room in the arm side. Because when you're making very full sleeves, that's something you kind of run into as being an issue in the 1830s. They had famously tiny arm sides, just incredibly narrow and incredibly fitted, and they also had obnoxiously large sleeves, and trying to gather down a sleeve and to fit it into that arm side and still have to be able to wear it comfortably, it can be hard sometimes. It was something that I definitely struggled a little bit when I was making my sunflower dress, which I guess was quite similar to this, but the sleeves would be very, very different. And I think it'd be fun to do an open front gown too, and then maybe play around with doing some piping. And by fun, I mean it would probably be absolutely miserable, but it would look really good. And I know treatments like this were quite popular during that period. In fact, I feel like the 1830s is when skirts really started getting fun again. And in the 1820s too, but skirts in kind of the latter half or latter quarter of the 1700s were quite boring and quite plain. So to see them really play around with decorations on the skirts is one of the things that I really like about the 1820s and 30s. And it's one of the things I haven't really done before, because when you're doing any treatments like that to a skirt, you're using a lot more fabric, and these dresses take quite a bit of fabric to begin with. So that's why it's not something I've really experimented with before, but I feel like it's something that I should experiment with. So yeah, this was the first design, just something kind of simple with statement sleeves and a pleated Bertha collar, and then a kind of zigzag overskirt of sorts. And as I said, I think this would be beautiful in a blue silk Duchess satin. And the reason I haven't used silk satin a lot before is just because it's so expensive. It's like $30 a yard, and that's in the garment district. Online, you'd be hard-pressed to find it for less than double that. So that's why I've never made anything out of it before, other than a corset I constructed for McCall's. But I think this dress would be beautiful in a silk Duchess satin. So sketch number 2 is this purple monstrosity, and this is inspired by a late 1830s or maybe even 1840s fashion plate that I actually own. I picked up this fashion plate in a store in Pennsylvania, but I've actually seen copies of it online too. And I love this dress. I love the shaping of the bodice. So it has a pleated off-the-shoulder bodice and then also has pleats kind of wrapping around the bodice. And it meets in a bow at the center front. So it's like your entire upper body is just a wrapped present with these pleated panels, and I think it's gorgeous. And it would be so much fun to do because it's quite similar to things I've done before, but it's a really different twist on that style of collar. And I wasn't sure what sort of skirt to do with this. I didn't really like the skirt in the fashion plate, but I like the idea of having these kind of crisscrossing pleated panels represented on the skirt as well, and then of course incorporating more bows into it because you can never have enough bows. And I put some ruffles at the hem too, and I really like this. I think it looks like a cake, like a delicious purple ruffly cake, which I was going to say is my type of cake, but I actually prefer chocolate. But this looks pretty delicious too. So this was just something that I was doodling, and again, I don't have any materials that would be suitable for this. I'm not even sure what type of fabric would be super suitable for this. I'd have to do some research into evening gowns for that period, but I thought this was quite fun to draw out and quite a fun idea, though it's not one that is like at the top of my list of things that I want to make. So the next design is based off of a couple fashion plates. It's kind of a hybrid, and it's also based off of some materials that I own. So this is a late 1820s design, I would say, and it doesn't have nearly as full of a skirt as you will see in the 1830s, and it doesn't have a gathered skirt. These skirts were cut with gored panels, quite reminiscent to skirts from the Regency period. So they were very flat at the front, but they kind of turned outward into more of a bell shape towards the hem. It's very pretty, it's very sleek. A lot of these dresses were made out of satin, so they have a really lovely sheen to them in person, or in photos, I guess. But they're not very fussy looking in the way they're cut. Instead, they're quite heavily decorated. So they're played a lot around with sleeves and a lot around with the hems during this period. There was something called padded hems, which were like these ridiculous comforter stuffed hems that had flowers in them and kind of painted portions over top of them, and they're really difficult to describe because they were just so ridiculous and so different from anything that you'll see in modern fashion or even most other periods of historical fashion. So again, I'll link some examples down below, and though I'd love to try making a dress with a padded hem someday, I think I would like to start by mastering this silhouette, and I actually have a taffeta that I think would be beautiful for something like this. It's really got the stiffness to hold the shape of a skirt like this, and it's in a really rich raspberry color with kind of a black shift to it. And then I think I would do 3 bands of ruffles across the hem. I know, truly shocking. And maybe have the bows on this made out of a velvet ribbon, which is like alternated with the bands of ruffles on the hem, because I have a whole bunch of velvet ribbon that I just purchased. And I would do the ruffles out of a black chiffon, so you could still kind of see the material underneath it, but you would get that volume and that texture incorporated into the dress. And then I could do one of the 1820s kind of large hats with a feather. And again, these sleeves would be made out of chiffon, so you could kind of see the pink lining underneath them, but they would have a very different texture. And I think they would feel quite light, even despite the amount of material that would have to go into them to get that volume and to get that quilted, ruched, gathered sort of effect. So yeah, I'm not really sure how to explain this one because I'm not really sure how to make the elements of this one that excite me, but I think it would be a really fun project. And I actually have the materials for that, so maybe it will happen. So the next idea is one that I definitely have fabric for. I actually just bought the fabric for this, even though I'm trying not to buy fabric. And this was heavily inspired by the Victoria TV show, which I've been watching. There are quite a few scenes where she's on her horse and wearing these beautiful 1830s riding habits that just have ridiculous leg of mutton sleeves and gathered sleeves. And I've researched 1830s riding habits in the past because I've wanted to make one, and they're really just the strangest looking garments. They've got the silhouette of 1830s dresses, but they're much more practical and much more heavily tailored, and it's quite ridiculous seeing such silly traits like these really puffy sleeves put into what is supposed to be a practical garment. So I've always really liked them, but I've never really had a reason to make one. However, this year I do want to focus a little bit more on tailoring, and I think this would be a fun way to combine kind of garments that I'm used to making and silhouettes that I'm used to making with some of those tailoring abilities that make me a little bit less comfortable. So I think it'd be cool to try pad stitching a collar for a riding habit and the cuffs and really play around with trim and all of those things I'm less familiar with. So I purchased 7 yards of an absolutely beautiful 100% wool, and it's a wool flannel, so it's kind of stiff, but it's also almost translucent. So I think it'd be really good for a project like this, and I'd really enjoy working with it. And then of course it'd be paired with a white blouse and probably a red bow, because I love me a good bow. And yeah, that's pretty much it for that one. I can link some references for this down below too if you've never seen 1830s writing habits before. Also, this was mostly colored with Copic markers. Basically, my process for these, because I guess I haven't mentioned it yet, is that I tend to start out with a pencil sketch, and then I trace the sketch with colored pencils. For example, the skin portions I would trace out with brown colored pencils, and then the dress would be traced out in whatever color I'm going to use for that, and then I erase the graphite pencil markings. And then I can go ahead and fill it in with watercolors or markers or more colored pencils. I'd say that I use markers and watercolors interchangeably. I like the saturation that markers have, but I've had mine for a very long time, so a lot of them have kind of dried out. So it just really depends if I have colors that will work for that project or not. Otherwise, I mix them with watercolor. And I use watercolors for skin and hair interchangeably with markers as well. I don't really have a preference. And I didn't get out any fancy watercolors for this. I'm just using like the little pots that they sell for children. Also, this is pretty deep in this video, so if you want to say something rude, you've probably already done it. But I don't consider myself that fantastic at drawing at all. It used to be something I was really, really passionate about, but I'm very out of practice. It's not something I've put a lot of time or energy into recently. I don't consider myself an expert at all. This was just a fun thing to do. I've actually regressed a lot with drawing. Like, I used to be quite proud of my drawing abilities, but those days are no longer. Like, seriously, I was looking through old sketches and I used to be able to draw hands and faces, and it was a glorious time, but now I just draw like noodle arms and hands that look like flippers, and it's depressing, but it's fine. So yeah, this isn't supposed to be like, wow, look at my amazing drawing abilities or anything. This was just a fun little chatty sort of video. So next up is more of an 1840s design, and this is a heavily gathered bodice. I'm actually working on a bodice a little bit like this now, where it comes down to a basque waist, and it has several bands of gathering that really pull it in at the waist and make it very flattering. But this would be more of an off-the-shoulder design, and it would carry through some of that gathering into the bust and into the collar. And then it would have gathered sleeves, and it would also have gathers at the skirt. So it would have two gathers at the skirt too to kind of mimic the sleeves. But what I think would be really fun with this project is to incorporate millinery leaves, so vintage velvet millinery leaves. And the actual dress itself would be made out of muslin and a very fine, very kind of lightweight cotton, because muslin was a much thinner fabric in the 1700s and the 1800s than it is now. So it would be a very fine white cotton and be very heavily gathered, and then you would just have those bright kind of pops of those vines and leaves on it. And I think it would be beautiful, and it would be such a fun play on that style of dress, because I honestly find muslin dresses a little bit boring. So I think this would be a fun way to kind of combine some of the trims that I enjoy, make something a little bit more special, but also making a really classic muslin dress, since I've never really done that before, except for my very horrible, very much a failure chemise a la Reine, which I made a couple years back. And I'd mimic that vine detailing around the collar and probably in a hairpiece too. So that's one design, and I actually have the muslin to do this. So it's really just up to me to buy the millinery leaves and commit to a somewhat boring dress. But I think I'd have fun with it if I really played with the gathers and did a bunch of the hemming by hand, because I do love hemming by hand. This is another one that I could actually make. I've got this beautiful silk. I don't know what type of silk it is, but it feels a lot like a silk taffeta. It's just that the color is more variegated. It's in this really vibrant green, and green is one of my favorite colors. I don't know how many green dresses I made. I feel like not enough for how much I like the color. But I also just kind of have a fascination with green dresses from the 1800s, because at that point in time, green dyes were made out of arsenic, and they were very, very poisonous. So it was a very pretty color, but it was a very dangerous color too. And a lot of people that worked with those dyes became very sick and even died. I think one of the most dangerous jobs you could have was being the person responsible for coloring millinery leaves for hats, because you were using green pigments all day long, and you could just inhale it and become very, very ill. So it's quite sad, but it's also an extremely interesting history of this color, and the fact that so many dresses were this color. And I've seen, I think, 3 bright green dresses that also happen to be archery dresses. So I don't know if that was a color that was associated with sporting, or if I'm just like laser focused on green dresses. But that's really inspired me to make kind of a sporting or archery ensemble from the 1830s. And I'd also really love to play with doing tiered puffed sleeves. I don't think I've done this since one of my first historical costumes, which was inspired by Sakizo artwork. It was a Renaissance project, and it had tiered sleeves like this. But I think it's just really cool looking, but it's hard to master those proportions. It can make your arms look very short and end up looking not very elegant, but it's something I'd like to try because I've never done it or haven't done it in a long time. And then I could have sort of fitted sleeves that maybe lace closed around the cuffs. I'd love to incorporate a gold belt into this with a really obnoxious belt buckle. And then of course make a matching hat and kind of incorporate more of those brassy tones into the trims for the hat and the feather. And I think I want to try dyeing some stuff. Not like killing things, like using fabric dyes on things, because I purchased some from Michael's for a few pairs of shoes, and I think it'd be really cool to try dyeing some trim to match that really vibrant green fabric that I have. So maybe this whole thing could be trimmed with a lace that is dyed to match. So you just see a border texture around the dress, but not necessarily, it wouldn't jump out to you as trim. So I think that would be really fun, and it shouldn't be too difficult of a project, though I'm probably jinxing it by saying that. Oh, and for this, I could also make a fichu. I'm probably not pronouncing that properly, but that's okay, which were another incredibly common garment that I haven't really made from the 1830s. And they were almost like a shawl or a collar that were made out of incredibly intricate lace, and they were often worn over top of dresses and sometimes were large enough that they even completely covered your very large sets of sleeves. So I think that would be a fun thing to try making. This entire project is just, I don't know, it ticks a lot of the boxes for me. It's kind of like fussy, but it's also a relatively simple shape, and you could use some lace and you could use some color, and I don't know. This was one of the sketches I didn't really want to give away because I was quite excited by this idea, but I don't need the sketch to make the dress, so it's fine. So this next idea is quite simple, and it's actually quite reminiscent of the first 1830s dress that I made, which was several years ago now, and it was a red cotton sateen gown, and it had a pleated Bertha collar, and then a fitted bodice, and it had piping around the bodice and a heavily pleated skirt, and it had these really obnoxious, very, very full pleated sleeves that were actually stuffed with quilt batting to hold the shape. And then the rest of the sleeve was fitted down to the wrists. And I used a little bit of lace on this, and I made a bonnet. I feel like it was one of my first historical headpieces that I ever made. And I remember feeling so, retro is the wrong word, so historically accurate in that gown. Like, I feel like that was one of the first things where I actually got the silhouette kind of right. And it just made me feel awesome and so enthusiastic about historical fashion. And I really remember walking around that dress thinking, wow, this is so historical. This is so great. This is so, like, no one could possibly perceive that this is an original dress. And it had a zipper in it. Like, it was not a historically accurate gown. It did not fit me particularly well, but that kind of inspired me to make more historical things. And I think that's why I still look back at the 1830s with such a fondness as a period. It's one of those in-between periods that doesn't seem to get a lot of love. It's getting more love now with the show Victoria, and a lot of people on Instagram are actually making things from this era for a Jane Austen festival. But I feel like it's kind of right in between the Regency period, which is heavily referenced by reenactors, and the Civil War era, which is also heavily referenced by actors. But the 1830s and the 20s don't seem to get a whole lot of love, despite being a really fun hybrid of those two periods and having a lot of really unique details, like how they play with the hems and the sleeves and the collars and stuff that you don't really see anywhere else. So it's one of my favorite periods, and it's one that I always seem to come back to. But I don't think I've ever made a dress from the 1830s that I just absolutely adore and like ticks all the boxes for me. So that's probably why I still gravitate towards it, because I do want to make something from that period that I'm really, like, truly happy with. And maybe one of these designs will be that project. We'll see. So this is very similar to that dress that I made so many years ago, and I think it would actually be quite fun to make this as kind of a more historical version of that dress and what I would do differently now. And one of those things I would do differently is I would use a taffeta instead of a cotton sateen, and I actually own the taffeta that I'm thinking about. It is a 100% silk taffeta and is made out of a bright yellow and white kind of 1-inch gingham pattern. And it would be so obnoxious as an 1830s dress. It would be awesome. And I think because the fabric itself is so loud that I could kind of get away with not necessarily doing a lot of details on the hem and really just kind of focusing on recreating that bodice shape that I made so long ago. So that's that idea. And then this next idea is also quite yellow. So this isn't inspired by anything in particular, though I did use a reference for the bodice, so that's a lie. Then I wanted to do very floaty, kind of bell-shaped sleeves, and I actually envisioned these sleeves being made out of chiffon or something quite drapey. And as you can see, it is very yellow, and the reason it's yellow because I want this to be a Bumblebee inspired dress. Yes, you heard me right, and I'm not talking about the Transformer, I'm talking about like actual cute little fuzzy bumblebees. And this idea was actually totally inspired by a hat that I saw in a magazine from the 1850s. And that hat was just a simple straw hat that had a ribbon on it, and then it had a bee or an insect brooch. And I was like, yes, I want to make a dress totally inspired by this hat. And for a costume like this, I think it's quite nice to do something simple because it doesn't really have any basis in historical fashion. It's historically inspired, but this isn't a gown that you would actually see in the 1830s. So instead of making something that is inaccurate from the 1850s, which requires twice as much fabric, I might as well do it in a period which I find incredibly flattering and fun, which would be the 40s or the 30s. So anyway, my idea for this is just to have a gold or a yellow kind of dress with a relatively simple skirt. And it might be a tiered skirt, so there'd be like yellow over top and then black underneath. Or maybe I would use a thicker yellow fabric for this and then just have black lace creeping up the hem. And actually have the lace, or maybe even bead it. So there's kind of a line going up the skirt, which is traced out with beads. And then on the bodice, it would have these openings, as I said, where you can see something underneath it. So I'd probably put like ruched black chiffon underneath it. Have the edges of the keyholes outlined in black piping or something, and have the neckline outlined in black piping, and maybe the sleeves could be black, like a black velvet. That's kind of what I'm envisioning. I don't know, I just want this to have a lot of texture to it. And then in between the keyholes, there'd be more little bee brooches or hand beaded bees or something. And of course there'd be one on the hat too, and a feather, because you can't have a hat that doesn't have feathers on it, right? I don't know, this is just one of those ideas that I came up with and was immediately quite excited about. Like, that would be a really fun project, and it would be one of those projects that I would want to buy fabric in person for. I really don't know what fabric I would use for this. I'm tempted to use something bright yellow, but I also don't want it to be too obnoxious and costumey. However, if I use a more muted kind of goldish yellow fabric, I think it would look very, very similar to the sunflower dress that I made. That's definitely something that I'm going to think a lot about, and sometimes with projects, if I think too much about them, I get bored of them, but I don't think that's going to happen with this one. I think this one that I'm going to really look forward to working on whenever I get the chance to do so. So this is another idea that I actually have fabric for. You'll have seen the fabric for this if you saw my Lancaster, Pennsylvania fabric haul. I purchased 8 yards of this striped cotton, and it's in a really nice peachy color, and it's got this almost like bubble print within the stripes. And I just thought it was a really lovely fabric. I ended up purchasing it in 2 colors, and I think I'm going to use one of the colors for something 1860s, and then I'd really like to use the other one for something more casual 1830s or 40s, because I've never made an 1840s day dress which has a gathered bodice and the kind of ease to it that a lot of day dresses from that period would have had. And again, I would love to play around with doing tiered skirts or just something a little bit more playful with the skirt, something a little bit different than I've done before. I don't know if I have enough fabric to do that, but I'm sure I could figure it out. I'd also really love to do sleeves that have kind of a gathered or sheared upper portion and then a ruffle, and then they fall into wider balloon sleeves. And I made sleeves similar to this when I first started making historical costumes with another 1830s project that I thought was super historically accurate, but super definitely wasn't, and also didn't really fit me. It did not fit over my hand, and it also had a zipper, and I think I ended up breaking the zipper. So it was not great, but you know, it looked okay from certain angles if you squinted. So it'd be, again, quite fun to take some of the elements out of that very failed project and see how I would do them now, and then just play around a lot with the bodice shape and the skirt shape and do some things that I've never done before. And again, I compared this with a fichu, and I think it would look really, really nice with a bonnet. Not many of these projects had bonnets. I think this is the only one. But doing this out of a bonnet made from kind of a matching silk, I think would be really lovely. And if I could find some sort of ruched trim for this, that'd be nice too. I don't think a day dress would typically be trimmed, but I like me some trim. So yeah, that's this one. So this last one is probably the most planned project I have from this video because I specifically bought fabric for this, and I specifically bought fabric for this very recently. Fabric Mart was having a free shipping sale and 60% off everything, and I totally fell for it. I didn't want to buy fabric, but I wanted to buy fabric enough that I bought fabric, so I guess I did want to buy fabric. And I purchased 7 yards of this bright checked silk dupioni that has an embroidered floral pattern on it. And I thought this would be amazing for an 1820s or 1830s skirt. And I've seen quite a few of these skirts that are very similar. They're all made out of gingham or plaid fabrics, and they all have tons of ruffles. So the top is relatively straight and then it's gathered at the back for volume. And then there are tiers of ruffles just going around the hem. And I love it because I love ruffles so much. And if I'm feeling really adventurous, maybe I will hem the bottom of the ruffles with like velvet piping or do scalloped hems on them or something. Or maybe I will be in a bad mood, not feel like putting in that much energy and just make them straight. We'll see. But that's what I purchased that fabric for. And then I think I could use that really lightweight cotton that I own and have mentioned several times already in this video to create a blouse. And again, I would love to do puffed sleeves. And if I'm using a light enough cotton, I think I could do very heavily puffed sleeves. So having 5 or 6 puffs per sleeve, which was something quite common in the Renaissance era, but it was also common in the 1830s, and I think it's a really fun look. And it's difficult to research blouses from this period because Spencers were a far more common kind of upper body accoutrement garment. Garment's the word I was looking for there. Don't know how I forgot that. But you can find evidence of blouses that were worn during this period, and they tended to be really elaborate. So to have really kind of full detailed sleeves and lace inset work and ruching and elaborate collars. And I think I would just have a lot of fun trying to figure that out. I know I recently made a Civil War era blouse and I was quite frustrated because I had to simplify it a lot to suit the project I was working on. So to be able to get all of that kind of, I don't know, energy out of making a complicated blouse on making a complicated blouse from this period to go with an obnoxious skirt, I think I would quite enjoy that. So that's an idea, and since this is more casual, I could pair this with a really large hat too, and I do love large hats. I feel like I've said a lot of things I love in this video, but it's all been true. So yeah, that is this design, and that pretty much finishes off this video. I'd love to know which design is your favorite. I think in a couple weeks time I might post a poll over on Patreon so you can vote for which one of these you think I should construct, but I'd love to hear all of your comments in the comment section as well. And if you enjoyed this video, then let me know. If you didn't, that's fine. You could also let me know that, and I will keep that in mind for the future. But if you did really like this, then maybe suggest another decade I could do this with, because I really enjoyed this. It was a fun way to spend an evening, and this has been a really fun voiceover to do. And then a final question is, would you like to see me live stream something like this? Because this is very stagnant. Like, the problem with live streaming sewing is that I don't stay in one place. I'm going between my table and my ironing board and my sewing machine and everything in between, and I think it'd be really hard to document that entire process live. But I could definitely do something like this live and maybe answer some questions along the way. So is that something you'd be interested in seeing? Or is there some other live streaming content that you'd be interested in seeing? I don't really watch live streams, so I'm kind of at a loss for what I should live stream, but I want to start doing live streams because I said I was going to, and I haven't. So get back to me on that. Thank you so much for watching this video. I definitely enjoyed making it, and I hope you enjoyed watching it and hanging out with me. And I will talk to all of you very soon.